All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap. I'm really excited about this one. It's going to be really, really fascinating. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your web interface and submit your question into the Q&A tab, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 big lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Finding and Preventing Secrets in Code. Our speakers today are Chris Salmons, who is a developer evangelist at Blue Bracket, and Prakash Linga, who is the CEO and founder of Blue Bracket. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. It's great to see you both.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Charlene, and thank you all for taking the time to learn a little bit more about why finding secrets and detecting them are so important. So thank you all.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and
okay.
Chris, I'll let you get right into your presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlene. Yeah, thank you again. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about finding and preventing secrets in code. You know, it's from an agenda, talk a little bit about myself and Prakash, and then we're going to talk a little bit about this whole shift left movement and really what is it? You know, there's a lot of people, I think, that have different terminologies for this. So we're going to quickly touch on that and why it's important, and then dive more into, you know, the threats and why secrets in code are such a big deal, and you know how organizations are struggling and also how some are handling that today. And then a very simple 3-step approach on how to detect. And this really ties back to that whole shift left notion of empowering and starting with the developer first. And then just a quick recap at the end, and how, you know, after the call today, you can very quickly go and arm your developers and your entire team with a few simple things to start practicing better hygiene when you and your developers and the rest of your team are actually committing code. And then we're going to leave about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. So I look forward to all your questions at the end and all your feedback and comments. So Chris Salmons, I am our developer evangelist. SCSA, I get a lot of different hats, but today I'm the developer evangelist. I work with all of our customers. I've worked with Ajay and Prakash across multiple companies. So it's our entire team is very security focused, and you know, very excited about what we're doing here and just this whole problem in this new space that's evolving across the industry. Andrew Schmidt was going to be joining us today, and he still might jump in. He's dealing with the Sev1 issue right now. Andrew is the application security lead at iHerb. iHerb is one of my customers. They're a great group, and they've got some really unique challenges, even outside of just our product, just as a whole. And you know, I really hope Andrew's able to jump in, but I'm sure all of you know there's issues that do come up, and I'll definitely make sure I touch on some of his talking points. And luckily enough, we've got Prakash that's filling in, who is amazing and has a lot of insight and is an expert in this space as well. So he'll be chiming in and participating in this. So I don't know, Prakash, do you want to say hi? Introduce yourself?
Super excited to be part of the webinar, right? So Andrew is really sorry that he may or may not be able to join it. So, and he was really looking forward to this. So I'm excited to answer any questions you may have and chime in as needed.
Awesome. Thanks, Prakash. So I want to start off with a quote. You know, prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. And I like this a lot. It's from Dr. Eric Cole, if any of you are familiar with him. And I think this really is applicable for what we're talking about today is, you know, in a perfect world, it's this whole zero trust notion and being able to prevent and really keep out all the bad guys and make sure people can't get in. But detection is really where it starts, and getting visibility, and a lot of tools that are out there today that are providing this level of detection. But, you know, source code was really kind of a green space outside of a lot of the open source tools for a while. And so I think this is just a really great theme to keep in mind as we're going through this today. And it's something that, I have many conversations with my customer and they agree. So I thought it was really applicable to kind of start with this, and it's one of my favorite quotes. What is shift left? I think this is a big topic here. And, shifting left, it's really just a principle that security should move from the end of the development life cycle to the left. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is it should start with the developer. A lot of times people are looking after the math. They're tying it into CI/CD, into their pipelines, but there's things that we can do even before that to really help empower and move towards this shift left notion. So I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page here. And, this is really a big theme of what we're going to cover today. And, there's 3 very simple steps. Obviously, there's more that from the best practices that really tie into this whole shift left notion as well.
Yep. And as a developer, right? So, and many of you in the audience are developers, right? So you would attest to this, which is the best way to address something is to find and fix that on your developer machine within your developer environment, right? Whether it's a feature bug, whether it's performance, whether it's security related, right? And that's really what we are trying to enable here in the security world, instead of having these issues found towards the end in isolation and making it extremely difficult and challenging for engineering to follow up on and fix. How about we find them early, right? As early as on the developer environment, right? Or in the CI/CD pipeline, right? And that's really the shift left principle. Aligns well with how developers work and what's right efficient for them.
Yep. Thanks, Prakash. So the elephant in the room and what we're talking about here, a lot of this ties back to the breaches. And, this is a lot of these companies, in some cases, they are adopting more of a shift left mentality and approach to, their code. But, things get out. I think this big stat in 2019, almost 50% of breaches, they came from the misuse of credentials. Not necessarily that developers mean to be malicious. In a lot of cases, Prakash and I talk to customers and potential customers every single day. And it's not necessarily the malicious actor, it's the developer that accidentally commits something or contributes back to an open source project, or thinks something's commented out, or they send out a password or a database schema that, really can put the organization at risk. And this is a very common theme that we hear, and that's where a lot of these breaches are, it's what they're tied back to. And I think the biggest one, which I'm not going to talk too much about it because everybody's talked about it, is obviously the SolarWinds. And this was a direct attack on their supply chain. And you have to know your bill of materials. And, with the SolarWinds attack, this is something that's widespread, and it was very well thought out, but a lot of this also could have been prevented if this whole shift left notion would have been adopted early on, as well as other things across static code analysis and a lot of the other tools that are out there today. But, this is really the big talking point. This is what a lot of our customers and just people that we engage with across the space, it's a very difficult thing to solve too. The big challenge here is you don't want to impact the developer. Developers, they are the one group that, really can't introduce any new steps, and they don't like friction. So how do you go about doing this without really impacting them, but also empowering them and not feeling like it's that big brother approach? So, that's really been the challenge here, and that's why you see a lot of this. And most companies are more on the reactive side than the proactive side that we engage with. We're starting to see more and more organizations, small and large in this space, really understand, that this is a problem. And SolarWinds, I think, brought this to light. Obviously there's stuff with Xbox, Mercedes, a lot of the GitHub credential leaks, Uber, things that we hear about because we're in the space, but SolarWinds was a big one. And it really woke up a lot of people across a lot of organizations. And, what we're going to talk about today, a lot of this could have been prevented if a few of these simple steps were put in place. Prakash, did you want to add anything to this? Any other comments on just this as a whole, or maybe specifically the SolarWinds attack?
I think SolarWinds is just one example of many public breaches that have started with or been heavily influenced by secrets or credentials, passwords, and other information in code, right? Sensitive information that should not be in code, right? And it happens way too often, many times inadvertently, right? And that's really what we're here to talk about in trying to understand both being aware of when some of that sensitive information makes it to code, but but also more importantly, how to prevent that from happening in the first place.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree more. Yep. So code security threat number one, it really is secreting codes. There's a lot of organizations out there today that are obviously scanning their code, especially through their pipelines, but a lot of this is static code analysis. And what we're talking about today is specifically secrets and tokens and credentials that are making their way out. Secrets in Git are dangerous. A recent report that I think GitHub actually put out said about 1% of all check-ins, they actually have vulnerabilities or contain tokens and secrets. And I think the big thing we have to remember here is source code, it's leaky. Code's copied and transferred everywhere. It gets designed, it's a collaborative tool. It's exactly what it does. And even promotes code to be freely distributed. So it's a very collaborative, open source, community type environment. And the challenge here is projects can be cloned onto multiple machines. They can be forked into new projects, distributed to different customers, made public and so forth. And before you know it, one thing that gets out, it could be spread across multiple devices all across the world. And this is really one of the big challenges here. And, each time it's duplicated on Git, the entire history of that project is also duplicated. So that's one thing I think a lot of people have to realize. And, the answer is not to shut down Git. A lot of companies that we'll talk to and we engage with, their first action is let's turn off access to GitHub Cloud or GitHub Cloud or Bitbucket and so forth. But there's things that you can do to not have to take that approach and still empower your developers and allow them to contribute, access open source, and do the things that they need to on a day-to-day basis. So, Prakash, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think, Chris, you covered it, right? So.
Perfect. Yeah, so, why secrets in code are so widespread? I think, Prakash, it was probably best for you to take this when you were going to talk a little bit about this as a whole and why it's such a big issue.
Yeah, no, happy to, right? So, as you very well know, right? So writing code is a challenging process, right? And many consider it a creative process, right? And there's many steps involved, especially when you're thinking about a backend microservice, right? In the context of Kubernetes or otherwise, right? And writing this code, right, and more so with the advent of Git and open source and other tools, right? So it is very common to use a separate repository per microservice, leveraging Git, because Git makes it so easy to work with code, collaborate with code, version code, right? Makes it easy to share code in libraries or otherwise, right? And it is also very straightforward for developers to clone that code onto their machines, whether it's work machines or sometimes other home machines and others that they may be using. And many a times, right? So as a developer, I do this. I'm working with not just my company repositories, but I'm also working with other personal projects and others, right? And this is where it becomes a little bit more challenging for me to sort of keep track of what belongs in the enterprise world versus what belongs in my own personal world, right? But I think the most aspect that I try to keep in mind is many a times as a developer, right? So I tend to work on and try to get things done efficiently. Sometimes take the shortest path to get there, right? And always hope to come back to it and address it, right? And secrets in code are no different, right? So they are a necessary piece of the puzzle, especially in this microservices world, when you're calling different services that may require authentication, and not just these tokens, right? There's also passwords and credentials that have been around for as long as code has been around, right? And many a times, even though as a developer you're aware of best practices, right? There are times when this the best practices are not respected, and these credentials, passwords, secrets make it to code, right? And a lot of times you intend to come back to it, but unfortunately the challenge here is once something is checked into Git, that's here to stay within Git, right? And because it's a version control system, and Git keeps all the versions, right, across branches, multiple branches, not just your main branch, right, and across all your check-ins from day zero, right? And many of us tend to forget that, right? And as some of you, Git experts may know, right, it's extremely expensive to rewrite history to remove, right, sensitive information in that repository. It's very infrequently done, right? And that's where this problem of secrets in code, right? Call it, developers being lazy, or call it just Git being very powerful, right? Becomes a widespread problem, right, across these different types of sensitive information, passwords, multiple types of secrets and tokens, right, and credentials that either are in variable assignments, are in URLs, or are used as authorization header, right, and sometimes in N files that are accidentally checked in, right? We have seen multiple different ways, and sometimes they're more sneaky. They're dynamically generated, right? Those are harder to catch, right? But it's a problem that happens all the time, even with the most savvy of developers, right? And that's why we see this to be widespread.
Yeah. No, Prakash, that's a great point. And I think, just to kind of give an example off of that, this is something that Andrew was going to talk a little bit about. Andrew's background, he came from L'Oreal, where he was on the AppSec team, and he's now over leading the entire AppSec DevSecOps team at iHerb. If you're not familiar with iHerb, they're a very large old e-commerce company. They were original.com. They've been around for a long time. They're the Amazon of vitamins and supplements. So they've got, right around 1,200, 1,300 employees. And Andrew just stepped into this role about 7-8 months ago. And this kind of ties back to what Prakash was saying. They're not going to go back and rewrite things. And the big thing for him was looking through a lot of this old code that's been migrated across legacy systems from Perforce, and now they're actually running in Bitbucket. And the challenge for them was just understanding where things were at and being able to go through and use various tools to scan and understand and get more of, we call it a blueprint, but a blueprint of, where their code is, how many repos they have. And a lot of it's because, best practices weren't in place 5 or 6 years ago. People were actually going through and they're hard coding credentials, and it's kind of trying to find a needle in a haystack. So it's not just organizations where you've been at for a long time. This is really applicable, and we see this very frequently with new AppSec or DevSecOps leaders, or even DevOps team members that are being pulled into more of the security role of what kind of tools and how can they apply these to their new jobs. And I think, I'll talk about that a little bit more here, but I couldn't agree with you more, Prakash, and just wanted to add that comment. Great. And this is just, I think it's a very interesting one. So if you're familiar with Ghostwell's, hacker, and this is really just outlining a very simple example of, and the comment here is people are always uploading sensitive files to GitHub. It's a gold mine, and it's true. He actually went through and performed an external pen test and was able to use GitHub Dorks, which is an open source tool. I'm sure some of you have used it, to find an exposed bash history file. And it was loaded with SSH passwords. So you can see just here, if you can see the screenshot's a little small, but look how easy it is to go and find, AWS keys and other keys live. And this is consistent, even when we're just going and looking through public Git repos, even outside of using our tool, something that we come across very frequently. So this is stuff that people are looking for. It is a huge problem, and it's something that organizations need to figure out how to remediate in short order. Prakash, any comments on this?
No, I think exactly what you said, right? So as well, most developers, like we talked about, both work in the enterprise world and have a presence in the open source world, have their Git profile, right, publicly available. It is more common than we'd like, right, for developers to contribute things into their the public domain that may contain information, whether it comes from their company or not, but information that's is sensitive, right, and is inadvertent, right? So the bash history is a great example, Chris, that highlights the severity of the problem, because that goes back in time, and you can look at everything that's there, right? And it's not limited to just this, right? So we've seen right, all kinds of credentials, FTP passwords, URLs, right? And some infrastructure as code and some sensitive information pointing to right, some internal IP addresses and other such information as well. So this problem is widespread, and the best way to think about right, addressing the problem is to prevent this from happening in the first place, right? Right from the developer machine, right? But at the same time, as Chris mentioned, and as Andrew, right, would attest to this, right? So it's important to have the right tools to, right, have a state of the union today, right, in terms of where things are, and make sure that you're set up well to prevent this problem from happening going forward. So you're both addressing the risk that you're already facing today, but you're making sure that you're not right, increasing the risk. You're not adding to the pain, right, and making sure that you're clean going forward, right. And we'll talk about both of those aspects as through this webinar.
Yeah, and I think Prakash, you said something interesting. It goes back to a point that I made earlier, which is, you know, in our experience and most of the conversations that we have with our customers and just other industry experts and, you know, AppSec, DevSecOps team leads, you know, it's not necessarily the malicious act. You know, most developers today, not most, all of them, you know, the first thing we ask developers, you know, hey, show us your Git profile, show us the projects or the, you know, the files and the repos that you've been working on. And it's usually from existing customers or companies or jobs that they've had. And that's usually one of the biggest things that we see is people will take, you know, a project that they've worked on or files, and that's their CV and they're proud of it. And they don't mean to be malicious with it, but a lot of times that's where it's sitting out on these public repos. And that's a very, very common theme that we see, especially when, for us with our customers, we go through and do an initial scan across their enterprise code servers as well as public Git. They're very surprised to see what's there. And that's usually one of the common themes that we see. So it's, again, it's not malicious. It's a lot of times developers just being developers and working the way they have. And security is now trying to figure out how do they get their hands on this and get better visibility so they can start detecting. Yep. So how to detect? I think it's a great segue into that. You know, we've broken this down in just a few simple steps, and obviously we could go in a lot deeper, but for time's sake, we're just kind of focusing on, these are the three that we see from a best practice standpoint. And this obviously all maps back directly to this whole shift left notion of really starting and empowering with the developer and starting that process there. So the first one is obviously scanning pre-commits. You know, this is, I equate this to, you know, I've asked a lot of CISOs, been in the security space for a while. You know, what's the one tool that, you know, if there was nothing in place, what would you implement? It's Password Manager, a LastPass, a Keep, Dashlane, whatever you might be using. I honestly put this in the exact same bucket. A pre-commit tool that your developers can use, and a lot of them will use this for vulnerabilities, scanning, making sure, you know, the code that they're committing is clean, but specifically for secrets. And this is a very simple thing to do. There's a lot of free tools out there. You know, Blue Bracket, we have one of them. We have a CLI tool in our community edition. And this allows the developers to scan their pre-commits before anything gets committed and then push back to the actual repo itself. So this is very shift left. You're starting with the developer. You're empowering the developer to make good decisions. And, you know, just like you would have with a git ignore file, a lot of these have, you know, we do the same. We have an ignore file. So if they need to exclude certain things, you know, this is all things that are doable. And, you know, there's a lot of tools out there. And this is a very simple practice that you as a company can make and implement with your developers today to start practicing good hygiene when it comes to scanning that code, not just for vulnerabilities, but also for token secrets and PII specifically. And I'm actually going to walk through here in just a second and show you what this looks like. But I was going to say, Prakash, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah. So, you know, it's extremely important that you pick a tool, right, that's works well with your developer ecosystem, right? And in particular, when some of these risks are highlighted, let's say there's a secret or password or token that's highlighted, right? That the false positives are low, right? So we don't want your developers, right, or the developers in the audience, right, to be spending time on things that are not of interest to you. And that's where, especially with some of these open source tools, right? So there is potentially a challenge there with seeing too many hits and not knowing what to prioritize or not, right? And so I would keep that in mind, right? When you think about detecting secrets, whether it's pre-commit or whether it's in the context of right, looking at historically all the commits that you have and understanding the state of the union, like Chris summarized the blueprint of where things are with respect to secrets in code across your repositories. It's important that you use a tool that helps you focus your efforts on a few that are potential candidates, right? And make sure that a lot of the uh, filtering of right, whether it's inactive or test secrets or sample code or any of that is happening behind the scenes. That's not what you as a security engineer or a developer would want to spend time on, right? And you'd want to focus on a few examples of the few that are likely candidates, and make sure that you're able to very quickly ascertain that if that as a production secret, and work on remediating that secret right away.
Yeah, that was great, Prakash. Yeah, and I think just to kind of show you how simple this is, obviously, I could go through and put a full commit in, but I just want to kind of highlight, we do have a CLI tool. I listed out a few others that are out there. And to Prakash's point, you have to make sure it's something you're comfortable with and it applies to the systems and the stack and, overall what your entire developer community wants to use. So this is just one example. And this is obviously something that's publicly available. So I'm actually going to minimize this for just a second. And I've made this a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. Hopefully you're able to see this okay. And I've actually installed our CLI. It's very easy to do. And most of the tools are. A lot of these are apps on GitHub, or there's a lot of open source projects that are out there. For us, it comes with a UI component, so it's not just all done within the actual CLI. So there's a GUI that's tied to it. And from here, it's very simple. It's just downloading the CLI tool. It runs, a lot of these will run across different operating systems. Some are specific to Mac OS or Windows. We're uniform across all of them. And then after that, it's really just exporting out that executable into the bash profile. And then after that, just to give you an example here, I've got a commit that I've got staged and getting ready to commit this in. And you can probably see from earlier, but if I click in and we'll just put in this initial commit, you can see that we've actually blocked that. So this is a great example of that pre-commit hook that we're providing and being able to block that specific secret that's in here. And this then notifies me as the developer, hey, this is something that I'm not able to. Now I could easily override this if I wanted to, but again, it's more of empowering the developer. This isn't meant to block them from working how they work on a day-to-day basis. It's notifying them and giving them the tools that they need to practice and have a good security posture when it comes to committing that code. And it's also, to Prakash's point, I'm the same way. I'm notoriously lazy. I know none of you are, but I am, I'll admit it. And, sometimes you get busy and you forget things are commented out, or you forget things that are included in there. This is just a great catch-all to remind you prior to committing and then pushing anything back to the actual repository as a whole. A lot of these tools too, including ours, have ignore files. Just like a get ignore file to where you could easily add these files in there. And obviously the pre-commit hook wouldn't pick these up. And a lot of the tools today, even including ours, will work directly within IDEs. So if you're using VS, which is pretty popular across most of the organizations that we work with, if you're actually committing directly from within there, we're able to surface those up directly from that view pane as well. So I couldn't harp on this one enough. This is a very simple thing that you as an organization can easily implement. And, there are a list. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second here. Put the screen back up. Can we see the slides again? There we go. Perfect. So we've listed out a few here, and these are just some examples. There's many more. These are popular ones and ones that a lot of our customers have tried to use in the past. Some are very focused on AWS tokens. Some are focused on passwords and credentials. Some are tied to just GitHub or GitLab. So to Prakash's point, go out, do some research, and you can see what's out there. If you want the easy path, all of you are going to get access to ours. We welcome all of you to our community. So for us, it's very much about empowering the developer. So we do have our community edition, which comes with the CLI as well as the UI component. The other cool thing is, it's very much of a community feel. We've got a Slack community channel set up, and it's a great collaborative space, not just for us and Blue Bracket as a whole, but just for an industry, how people are solving problems, issues that are coming up, as it's related specifically to scanning for this tokens and secrets. So it's great. And for going and signing up, we're actually, I think, Prakash, we're giving away a $50 gift card. Is that right? An Amazon gift card?
Yep. I think we'd love
so
for you
to okay.
Give this a try and give us feedback and ask questions in the Slack community, share any challenges you're facing, and I'm sure your colleagues are facing some similar ones, and we're happy to collaborate with you and enable you to work with your team, work with your whether it's the development team or the security team or the DevOps team, to successfully do the shift left aspect, So, and I'd love to talk some more about based on some of the questions here, as to where do you start and how you approach it. Joining the Blue Bracket community and leveraging Blue Bracket Community Edition, would enable you to first get a sense for what your current repositories look like. Where are the secrets in code? How big is this problem, And if you're able to, as a developer, see that this is something that you can effectively, use to find secrets in your code, or as a security engineer, you can, demonstrate to your engineering team that this is actually something that you can do well, And there's another one that works well for some of our customers is to integrate into the CI/CD pipeline. So then you're not necessarily asking the developer to run this pre-commit, And you could also start with CI/CD in just an information only mode, You don't have to block. You can inform, and show the efficacy of the approach, the tool, and how this would really help, the organization not just reduce your risk posture, but also help developers to follow the right path and take the necessary steps to work with secrets effectively, Then comes the final step, or to potentially shift this left further, and leverage the tool on the developer machine, And agreed, not all developers may or may not pick that up on day one, But given leveraging a tool like Blue Bracket, where it's configurable enough, you can deploy it in an just information only mode, where you can see how effective it is in highlighting the few that are important, and that's when you could turn it on as to block when secrets are detected, And so it's a series of steps that you can take to work alongside, for security, to work alongside engineering, to make sure that this is a step in the right direction, making engineering more efficient rather than something that they would consider as a challenge, that engineering or development may or may not want to leverage a tool like this.
Yeah, I think, Prakash, that's a good segue into kind of step two. If we're shifting it all the way to the developer, that's the starting point, and that's where I think it's the easiest thing to do. And even if you yourself are a developer, whether it's our tool or any of the other tools that are out there, we highly encourage, and I think it's just good for the industry as a whole. But it's a very simple thing to set up and get implemented and start, making sure that code you're committing is clean and safe. And then the second one, this is obviously something that, it's kind of a mixed bag for us. A lot of the organizations that we talk to, they have a pretty mature pipeline, CI/CD pipeline set up. Some are just starting to get it in place. I know Andrew was going to talk heavily on this, and again, apologies he wasn't able to make it, but This is something that, he's had a lot of expertise in his previous roles, and he's now brought over to iHerb. And for him, this is continuous. But the big challenge that we see here with CI/CD pipelines is it's not necessarily tied to tokens and secrets. And I'm sure some of you are shaking your head, and we understand that some companies out there, they're using a lot of the SAST or the raster tools, doing a lot of static code analysis, and some of that does have it built in, but the majority that we hear, it's not necessarily happening within this build process and through the pipeline as a whole. They're really focused primarily on a lot of static code analysis, and that's usually where a lot of our conversations will start, and they realize it's very different. And it's important to also be looking for these, and this is kind of a checks and balances. So you're empowering the developer, and you're continuing that shift left now, even with this CI/CD. And the big thing that we've seen with this is, and especially with our tool and other tools that are out there, is this is now starting to really empower the DevOps team, because a lot of these individuals are being pulled over from a pure DevOps role into more of this, what we hear, DevSecOps or AppSec. So they don't have to become security experts if this is set up and the right tools are in place. And this is a big thing, to have that continuous monitoring prior to anything actually making it out and that code becoming production code. And a lot of the tools, you probably saw some of those on the previous slide. We've got our core product, Code Insights, which is our paid version, and this is something that a lot of our customers leverage today, tying this in to their different CI/CD pipelines, and whether it's a Jenkins or CodeFresh or Azure DevOps, whatever you guys might be using, being able to simply call our API or any of these other open source tools, and being able to surface up where those alerts and where those misconfigurations are. It's not sometimes just tokens and secrets, it's the repo misconfiguration, understanding what's actually happening inside of your code base. That's what these tools provide. And they really enable and empower that DevOps team to make sure that things are moving through and getting approved correctly, and things are being detected early before it actually gets out into the wild. So I'm sure a lot of you are implementing this or have already implemented this, but this is kind of the next phase, is with this pipeline, making sure that the right scans are in place, the right approval processes are in place. And I think the biggest thing here is making sure things are configured correctly. I think a lot of times we go in, we see, stale reviews not being configured, or branch protections not on repos. And a lot of this overrides a lot of what happens in the CI/CD pipeline, especially if it's a very immature or it's an early process for the organization. This can put a huge risk onto it, especially from what we've seen. A lot of the people that are being pulled over to that aren't necessarily security experts. We're seeing a lot of that, especially at some of the larger companies. So I don't know, Prakash, do you want to add anything or talk to this at a high level?
Yep, no, totally, right. So, and Andrew, for him, right, the first step was to really understand the kind of risk coming from secrets and code in his environment, right, and was able to do that in short order by leveraging right, our Blue Bracket tool, right, to identify the risk, if you will, from secrets and code, right, and more importantly, focus on the few that are right, production tokens that are active, right, and then help remediate some of those. But the second big step that is taken alongside is to make sure that we're implemented in the context of the CI/CD pipeline and integrated into the tools that security and developers work with, right? For example, for Andrew and his team, Splunk is where they use they would use as a SIM solution, where all the alerts from different systems are piped in, and that integration into Splunk, removing those alerts from secrets or from other security tools into a single pane of glass is important to enable security teams, right, as part of their workflow, to sort of find and address these issues early, right? Similarly with developers, right? So whether you're a Jira shop or you use other tools, right? It's important that, or maybe Slack is a way to notify developers, right? Those integrations are put in place to further reduce that potential friction, right, and make it something that's natural for both security teams and developers to address these risks earlier, right, and shift some of those risks earlier in the pipeline.
Yep. Nope. Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Prakash. So then the last step is, and this is usually in our experience, where most of this stops. Really, because it's kind of a new space. And, I think if we take a step back and look, Prakash and I have both been in the security space. Prakash maybe a little bit longer than me, but I've worked with Prakash for a while. And, his last company, which I was at, was focused on encrypting and protecting and rights management for unstructured data. And that's really where we started to hear a lot of this, is our larger customers in the enterprise space saying, hey, can you guys provide the same level of visibility and security that you do for my unstructured data? You do that for our source code. And that was really because of this whole proliferation in, really 2017 of people really migrating and infrastructure really becoming code. And it was the more modern Git versioning tools. And, with that being said, GitHub was very much a developer in a community space for a long time. And the reason I bring that up is that's why this piece is so important, is the continuous monitoring aspect. It's a new space, and it's always been a hesitant space just because of nobody really wanting to impact the developers or intrude on what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But where we see a lot of the risks is on this step right here. It's the aftermath. It's a legacy code that's been sitting out there for 5 years. There's a new CISO, a new AppSec, a new engineering lead, and it's understanding, where are my risks? And this is very much a proactive approach, and it can also be reactive, seeing where a lot of your legacy stuff is, and just also understanding your code base as a whole. And this is a very, very important step. And what I mean by monitoring, obviously your CI/CD, it's continuous, but this is really making sure that what's happening not just internally, but what's happening externally. What's sitting out in public Git, what's sitting in open source, what's sitting in a lot of these community forums like Stack Overflow and Pastebin. Where is my company's PII? And a lot of times it's not just tokens and secrets. PII is a big thing that we see, especially with, the GDPR rules starting to make their way and be applied, at least at the state level now. We're going to see more of it, I think, at the federal, just my opinion. But, this is very important here, because credentials now and PII becomes just as important and just as big of a risk for an organization, especially with a lot of these regulations that are out there. So there's a lot of tools out here that can do this. I pulled up a couple of UIs, which I'll pull up again here in a second. Our community edition does this at more of just the secret level, and being able to help you identify those secrets. But our full product Code Insights does this across not only your enterprise code servers, but it's looking at public GitLab, public GitHub, public Bitbucket. We'll be adding Azure DevOps later on. It seems to be a pretty popular repo management tool as of late. And, being able to understand where the risks are outside of your network is the big thing. And it's not just us. There's a lot of open source tools that do it. And again, this is something that there are free offerings and free open source projects out there that can be used, or you can use a technology like ours. But, GitSecret, Trufflehog, a lot of these, like GitSecret's tied specifically to a lot of AWS tokens. It was developed by them. So this is great if you're a big AWS shop. Trufflehog's a very popular one, YAR, and then, GitHub and GitLab are starting to implement some of these as well. But, the big challenge that we see, some companies will have open source projects, or they will be leveraging GitHub or GitLab's functionality, but it's siloed to just that ecosystem. And you have to understand that if a developer is doing something, they might not just be doing it in GitHub. They might be doing it on GitLab or Bitbucket or on these community forums. So having something in place to scan and look for things outside of your enterprise code server across public Git and these other locations, to us, is critical. And this is really where, most companies are taking that reactive approach. If you shift all the way to the left and you're starting and you have got a really mature practice where you're empowering the developer, you're scanning for tokens and secrets in your pipeline, you might say, well, why do I need this? And, were those in place a few years ago when you guys committing and writing code 3 or 4 years ago? And most of the people we talk to, the answer is yes. So it's kind of a good housekeeping to clean up and see where you're at. And then obviously make sure it's kind of a checks and balances to make sure things aren't getting out and being alerted on them when they do. So to me, this is such a critical piece. The work doesn't stop once that code goes to production. It's also monitoring it, making sure that that production code is not sitting where it's, not supposed to be. So Prakash, I don't know, do you want to add anything to this as it relates to our customers and just what we see across the industry as a whole?
Totally. I think I echo what you said, Chris, right? So I think it's important to not think of it as one and done, right? Also, right, some of our customers started with sort of evaluating these risks, let's say once a week, right? And things start to pile up pretty fast, right? And that's where having a more continuous monitoring a view of the world, right, where you're equipped and enabled to, either in the context of a tool like Blue Bracket that gives you that monitors every commit and then gives you a complete perspective, or integrating into the CI/CD solution. That way, you're looking at every commit that goes through the pipeline, and hence have a continuous view of the world. Right, is important to make sure that you're not just addressing these risks one time, but are continuing to keep your company safe from the risks in code on a continual basis.
Yeah. And I think the other big thing here too, Prakash, that we're seeing is, we're starting to speak more to compliance and, data governance officers. That's becoming a more common thing here in the States, at least for us. Obviously, as with GDPR and in the EU as a whole, it's a whole different conversation. But, the big thing here is just having that audit trail too, and being able to go back and, our tool does that. Some of these others do it as well, just to be able to get that visibility and see, how did it get out there? Where has it gone? And being able to have that hard audit trail is something from a compliance standpoint that's also, equally as important and super, super powerful. And I can tell you story after story. It's not just tokens and secrets, that make their way out. A lot of these tools can pick up. We had one customer that people were mining crypto on their AWS servers and spinning up new services. So a lot of this stuff gets missed, and some of these are examples of DevOps moving into more of this security role, and having the right tools in place can empower that team and make sure they're doing their job successfully. And that's the big thing that we're trying to the point that we're trying to get across here. Yep. I think in closing, then, and we're going to step over to questions. Is this approach that we outlined today? You can go arm your developers with this immediately. In order to really truly shift left, it really has to start with the developer. And that's something that we truly believe. And that's why we have our community edition, because we want our community as a whole, the development community as a whole, to practice this. And I think it's something very important for us as developers to start working on and preaching across the industry. So I think the big things to take away, and some of these are common. I'm sure some of you are going to laugh at this, but, never hard code credentials in the first place. Seems dumb, but we do see this from time to time. That's a very easy practice. And use tools like a HashiCorp Vault or an AWS Vault to store your tokens and keys, or use API calls instead of hard coding those. And then the other is to really just provide tools, the right tool set, and empower those developers to start scanning their pre-commits. And whether it's ours or another open source tool, that's something that I think is critical to really start to adopt this shift left notion. And then not just scanning for vulnerabilities and code integrity, but scanning for secrets and other misconfigurations during that pipeline and during that build process and that approval process is critical to making sure that, things aren't getting out there. And in the event that they do, having that monitoring tool in place and being able to detect those if they do make their way out, so you can be proactive instead of reactive. And, everything that we've outlined today, these are things that can be done to certain degrees with, a lot of open source tools, or leveraging a tool or technology like Blue Bracket as it relates to kind of the continuous monitoring and the CI/CD piece. So very simple, but this is something I think a lot of people have been scared with to impact and change anything on the developer side. And that's been honestly the biggest thing I've heard is they're terrified that the developer is going to get up and walk out the door and go somewhere else. And I think with everything that we've shown you today, the big takeaway from this, none of this is going to impact your developer. You're empowering you yourself as a developer or your team to protect the company and the organization as a whole, and also to protect themselves too. I think that's the other thing is a lot of these developers get drug into this, and I've heard a lot of nasty stories, and so has Prakash, and a lot of the times they don't mean to be malicious, but it can fall on them. So these are some very simple things that you guys can apply today immediately to start making sure you're secure and practicing a good security posture, and it's committing your code. So that's really all that we had today. I went 4 minutes over. I said 15 minutes, so we'll do 11 minutes for questions. But Prakash, do you want to wrap up with anything before we step over to questions?
I think so. This whole idea of shift left is new, right? And I think with anything new, right? So there are bound to be some early challenges, right? So, and that's where thinking about right, initially understanding the risk and then shifting left one step at a time, more being informational and then enforcing some of these aspects, right, is the best way to bring your organization together with the common goal of continuing to ship software, quality software fast, but at the same time minimizing the risk to your enterprise, right? And we have seen this successfully done across multiple different organizations, right? And Andrew at iHerb as one example that has done this recently, while he's plenty new to the organization, right? And we've seen this done at a fairly large organization across multiple different development teams, across multiple programming languages and security and development ecosystems as well. So you can do it too. Let's make it happen.
All right. All right.
Yep.
Well, we are about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. So we have about 6 or 7 minutes for question and answer period. So why don't we just go ahead and dive right into the ones we've got. Mike asks, shouldn't there be an industry standard tool for use with Git in standard OS environments to stash passwords into local only environments and use an OS reference to the programmer developer's environment to pick up actual passwords, temporary or not? If GitHub, GitLab, MS repos, and all other public repos didn't just scan but promoted the method to stash passwords locally, it would start a cascade away from passwords and code. Yes? It's a long question and probably a very short answer.
That's a great observation, and yes, agreed, right? So I think one challenge for why this has happened yet is, as you very well know, these passwords, right? Those local passwords are not the only context in which the code is executed. Right? The code also maybe need to run in the pipeline, CI/CD pipeline, may need to run in production, and providing some of these credentials in that context is also important, right? And typically environment variables are one way to do this, right? Where you check in it, you have a .env file that's local for your local credentials. Whereas in the pipeline, you use secrets that are protected appropriately that enable executing this code in the pipeline, and the same with production, right? And many times, what happens in the context of production, maybe you use a vault cluster, right, is different from what you do locally, and totally empathize with you around that challenge. And I think I look forward to a world where there's a standard way to do this across all of those three environments: local, CI/CD, and production.
All right. All right.
I think, Prakash, I think we're getting to that too. I can see GitHub and GitLab really starting to move, especially with the enterprise adopting more of it over the last couple of years. It's still going to take a while, but I think they're slowly starting to make, some progressions, especially from, Git Universe this year. They talked about this a little bit.
All right. Yep. Great. Here's another question for you. Eric is asking, it is difficult to get the developers to run unit tests prior to commit. So how do we get them to run a secret scan before the commit?
So that's a great question.
Prakash? You go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, happy to. So I think the best way to think about it is use a tool that from a security perspective you think is effective, right? And show that it's effective for your developers. Right? Typically, it's done in the context of a CI/CD pipeline, right? Or make it available for your developers to use optionally. And we have seen some fairly large customers of ours use that as a very effective strategy to initially both enable it in the CI/CD pipeline in an information-only fashion, but also make the tool available for the savvy, curious, inquisitive developers to pick it up early. Then, if the tool is effective, if they see that it's actually working well, then the word spreads, right? And you'll see, not every developer, but many of them will start to pick it up. And once this is a required step in the CI/CD pipeline, then guess what? No developer wants to break the build, right? And they'd start running this locally, and that's what happens with linting tools, as an example, right? And this is no different.
All right, great.
Yep.
I think we have time for one more question, maybe two. We'll see. The next question from David, does it make sense and is it even legal to scan third-party open source dependencies too?
Perhaps I'll let you take that one from the legality standpoint.
Sounds good. So it's typically right, not something you want to do. In fact, one classic example is private keys in other open source libraries, right? That show up as what we would consider as false positives, especially if you're using a tool that's not smart enough, right? So this happens with whether it's JavaScript, dependencies, or other languages, Golang dependencies as well, right? And as a firm using third-party open source tools, you are not necessarily concerned about or interested in these private keys or any other secrets that may be within that open source library. What in fact you want to do is to automatically eliminate those so that you can just focus on the few in your code that's important to your organization.
All right, great. Let's try and slip one more in before we before we close it out. Eric also asks, what amount of time or investment does it take to set up the scanning pre-commits, and how long per individual repository?
So it's a matter of
good question.
So Chris, you can take that one.
Yeah. So as it relates to the pre-commits, it's you can go to our website or you can open up any, open source project, and it's a little bit of configuration. It's just basically going in and getting that executable added into the bash profile. And then from there, it's, the pre-commits there. So it's very short. Usually most developers will have it done in a couple minutes, and from there they can start scanning those pre-commits and doing those checks, just like I showed you a few minutes ago. As it relates to scanning the repos, how I'll talk to our service specifically, we actually will register a webhook against the enterprise code server, whether it be GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. And then from there, you're able to list the project or organization, and then we can manually go through and scan all of the repos, or you can select specific repos. So it really depends on how large the environment is and how many repos and how many orgs you're adding in. But from a benchmark, it's about 1 minute to 2 minutes for each one for the initial. We'll scan all the historical commits, and we're hashing and fingerprinting it. So it's about 1 minute to 2 minutes. And then after that, it's just the deltas and diffs that are coming in. It's pretty much instant.
Yeah, and to add to that,
answer your question.
And on the developer machine, it's a matter of seconds, right? If the question was more around using a tool like Blue Bracket, right? Maybe an install step, I would set up the pre-commit hook, right? And after that, every new commit you make is scanned within, it typically takes less than 5 seconds.
All right, awesome.
Yep.
Well, we are about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately that's all the time that we have for the question and answer period. If we did not get to your question, and I know there were a few that we weren't able to get to, but please know that the folks at Blue Bracket are getting a copy of all of the questions that were answered and that were asked, and I am sure they will be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. So, but again, I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. Also, a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following the webinar, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right. One last thing. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just gonna say, and I know we didn't get to some of the questions to your point, Charlene. So my email's here. Please reach out to me. I know Francisco, you had a question around Bitbucket. I'm more than happy to answer those and provide any guidance there. So please, by all means, reach out.
All right, great. Before we close things down, let's get to our Amazon gift card drawing, which Blue Bracket has kind of shown us up with their $50 Amazon gift card offer, but bear with me here. Our Amazon winners today are Timothy O. Congratulations, Timothy. John W. Congratulations, John. Monica R. Congratulations, Monica. And finally, Luis A. Congratulations, Luis. We will be following up with all 4 of you to get your Amazon gift card over to you via email. So please check your inbox. If you don't see anything in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Chris and Prakash, thank you so much for a great presentation. Lots of great information. I got a lot out of it. I know the audience did too, judging from the comments and the questions. So thanks so much for your time and your expertise. Really do appreciate it.
Perfect.
Thanks, Charlene. Thank you so much for having us.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
Yeah. Thank you all.